Hi everyone, I'm joined today by Dr. Samuel Brunk, who is the outgoing chair of the history department here at UTEP, and he is also an historian of modern Mexico. So thank you, Dr. Brunk, for being here and talking with us about a little bit about revolution. Just to start off, what, in your experience, would you say is the difference between a war for independence and a revolution?
Okay, well, I think that first of all, so these are separate categories, and it's important to recognize that they're separate categories, but also that sometimes these categories overlap. And so I would say that a war for independence is, on the face of it, a war for a country, some territory, to get its political independence from somebody who has colonized it, somebody who's controlled it, another country that's controlled it in the past, and that a war for independence like that can be a revolution. And I suppose I'd say that it's always, by definition, if it succeeds, it's a political revolution, because you're changing rulers. You're changing from, when the United States fought its war for independence, it had been ruled by England, and afterwards it was ruled by people living in the United States. And so there are new politicians in charge. I think that's a political revolution. But often when we say revolution and think of that word as a large civil conflict, what we really are thinking about is a social revolution. And wars for independence are not necessarily social revolutions. They can be, they're not necessarily social revolutions. A social revolution would need to go deeper and change basic social relationships, and I think offer benefits to people who are socially disadvantaged before. And so a lot of wars for independence, including, I would say, the war for U.S. independence, was not a social revolution. In Haiti, though, something much, much deeper goes on. So when Haiti gets its revolution, it's also a slave rebellion against slavery. And so when Haiti becomes an independent nation, it is also absolutely a social revolution. It's one of the most astonishing social revolutions in world history, because it may be the only really successful slave revolution in the history of the world. They overthrow, not only do they get independence, but they reject this social system that has kept those people in chains for a very long time. And so that is a profound social revolution at the same time that it's a war for independence. In Mexico, interestingly, Mexico's had two conflicts that kind of have to come into the discussion. So Mexico had an independence movement in the early 1800s, and that was always called the Mexican Revolution, until they had another big civil conflict in the 20th century that they then named the Mexican Revolution. And then looking back, they classified the one in the 1800s as the War for Independence. And so the one in the early 1800s that gets Mexico its independence, I would not classify as a social revolution. It was a political revolution. It achieved political independence. I guess I would say it's important to realize why these kinds of big violent events get romanticized. And they get romanticized. I would say that there's kind of two general reasons why they get romanticized. One is that people fight in these, they die in these, they sacrifice in innumerable ways. They're events that they're never going to forget in their lives. And so there is a deep kind of social feeling after these events, and often they're fighting for causes that they find are very, very important. So there's a deep social feeling rooted in experience that these were really, really important historical events. I know people who died for this cause or whatever, and so it just seems to be natural to human beings to remember those in a certain way, to value those people who die as heroes, not want to lose their memories. And so you put a certain spin on it, and sometimes that spin oversimplifies things, obviously, and portrays things as heroic, which were often very mixed. I mean, and sometimes you can even go so far as to forget the fact that fundamentally what these things are acts of mass violence and they're very bloody, and there's not anything very romantic about that.
Yeah.
But and then there's another trend, but I sort of understand that trend, and I understand the other one too. But the other one that sort of operates on a political level, and people often say that the winners write history, and so often what also happens is the new political regime that is created by revolutions and independence movements and so on, they're the ones that get to tell history in a politically loaded way that will maybe benefit their own interests, that may reinforce their own legitimacy, and so that is a little bit less. I'm a little less sympathetic to that, but I also see why they do it. So they make heroes partly to attach the legitimacy of their regimes to them, and they tell stories in a certain way to make their causes righteous in a way that will benefit them politically. And I think that's, I mean, it is also something that just always seems to happen. I don't think it's wrong to say the winners tend to write history, and they tend to write it the way they want it to be, and often in a romanticized way. And so those two processes, the kind of social, the lived experience that goes into trying to remember in a certain way, and then also the political goals that certain people have for remembering in a certain way, tend to get all tangled up, and you get a lot of romanticization, and sometimes you forget the kind of basic facts of violence and things like that.
Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating. Well, Dr. Brunk, thank you again for joining us and for enlightening us a little bit on revolutions.
All right, thanks.